Today we honor mothers of a different kind. Today we honor a group of women who rose up in the Midwest, Unitarian and Universalist ministers in the 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s. A group of fierce, powerful women. Laurie and Angela Chenus and others are going to introduce you to these women. We're going to sing one of their songs. They're called the Iowa Sisterhood, sometimes called the Prophetic Sisterhood. Kristen brought her book today, The Prophetic Sisterhood, and that's a wonderful book written by Cynthia Grant Tucker. So today we're going to introduce you to a group of women who are basically the mothers of our Iowa congregations.
From 1880 to about 1920, women were a crucial ingredient in the Western expansion of Unitarianism. People like Mary Safford and Eleanor Gordon sprang up to lead congregations in places like Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois. Because their influence on Midwestern congregations was so great, they are seriously our mothers. They nurtured our movement in this place. In the 1800s, nearly all of our ministers were educated at Harvard's Divinity School. It did not admit women. It produced many academic men. These New Englanders were not enthused about serving places like Keokuk or Hampton, Illinois. And when they did come, it was disastrous. One woman describes her Harvard-educated male Unitarian minister this way. While she had found most to be likable enough, they had been too academic and failed to understand that, to build and sustain congregations, a minister had to speak plainly and be concrete. Even less satisfactory were the young men who tried to serve up Boston's kind of theology to hungry liberals out on the frontier. You cannot plant Eastern Unitarian churches in this soil. The men, too, were unhappy, except a few that had some radical ideas up their sleeves. So what happened? The Westerners said, let's try it for ourselves. And those willing to serve often were women. Take Humboldt, Iowa. The town had been founded upon principles of religious freedom and equality. It had no traditional ties to Boston or its religion, so they looked within their own state for a minister and called Mary Safford as their first ordained minister in 1880. Along with her childhood friend Eleanor Gordon, she had managed to build a thriving congregation. Her success at organizing had brought her to the attention of the Western Unitarian Conference and its leader, Reverend Jenkyn Lloyd Jones. Jones championed Safford's call to ministry. Jones became a leading champion of women in ministry. Liberal religious in Iowa began to grow comfortable with the idea of a woman in the pulpit, and more women began to see their own potential for ministry as well. In Humboldt, Safford and Gordon opened their home to young women who showed some sense of calling to ministerial work and began taking them on as apprentices, grooming them for eventual placement in their own churches. Jones and the Western Conference continued to support the women in this endeavor. Soon it was over. There was a stained glass ceiling they crashed into, and that could not destroy. Other areas, women's suffrages efforts, Jane Addams' Hull House, other social work areas, called them to move on, since they could not move up. From the 1920s until about the early 1970s, there was a relative silence among women in the liberal clergy, but the impact of the Iowa Sisterhood lives on. Now, more than half of our ministers are women. Praise be. While there is still work to be done, we have learned some valuable lessons over time. Angela Chenus will be doing a reading from a sermon by Mary Safford.
Beneath a mass of earth and stones that had fallen upon it, an acorn lay. Little chance there seemed that it would germinate and grow, that it could overcome the pressure from above, push aside or surmount the obstacles on its way upward to the sunlight. But there was life within that acorn. And today, where it once lay crushed to the earth, there towers a mighty oak. As that monarch of the forest is the result of the evolution of physical life, so woman's place in the church as a minister of religion is the result of that evolution of spiritual life, which will yet transform the world. For centuries, the power of church and state rested on human souls with crushing weight. Little hope there seemed that the sons and daughters of God could ever rise into the noble status of manhood and womanhood. But there was life within. There were germs of wondrous good that were destined to unfold. The demand for civil and religious liberty was heard, and it grew stronger and stronger. Slowly but surely, the divine rights of human souls have been asserted. The authority of the priests has yielded to the authority of reason and conscience, until at last the world is awakening to the truth that every human being has a right to grow. Thus it has come to pass today, woman stands in the pulpit as an ordained minister of religion. With the growing recognition of the worth of the individual, woman is coming to her own. Vainly does the church attempt to stay her progress. When it quotes to her the words of St. Paul, "I suffer not a woman to teach," she calmly replies, as did the good old lady at the Presbyterian church meeting, "That is just where St. Paul and I differ." The eternal sanction of any good work is the ability to perform it. For this reason, the questions, can women preach? May women preach? Which some well-meaning people are still debating with ludicrous solemnity, have been answered affirmatively in the most convincing way, according to the scientific method, by actual experiment. In the face of deep-seated prejudice and bitter, persistent opposition, she has shown beyond question that she is not only able to preach, but also able to do far more, endure the strain of long city pastorates, and build up strong, growing churches. The place she holds today as minister of religion has not been given to her. She has won it for herself and holds it by right divine. Already attention has been drawn to the fact that there's a larger proportion of men in the churches that recognize and endorse the public ministry of women than in those that persistently exclude them from the pulpit. Human is a more inclusive word than men or women, and in the very nature of things, a well-rounded ministry will produce well-rounded churches, where men and women side by side will strive for life's best things. Women in the ministry exert a special influence in setting aside those offensive marriage customs which are relics of a time when woman was given away by another, was not recognized as an independent human being, but was transferred from the guardianship of her father to that of a husband when entering into the most sacred relationship of life, where man and woman should stand side by side as equals, self-reverent each and reverencing each. Whatever detracts in any way from the dignity and sweet sincerity of the marriage service should be put aside. The bride should not be given away nor asked to promise to obey, for the promise, if sincere, means subordination. And certainly there should be no idle forms, no meaningless promises of any kind. The whole service should symbolize a voluntary, sacred union of equals. For in the view of the subtle influence of outward forms in human thought and feeling, whatever tends to ennoble the marriage service tends to ennoble marriage, and thus uplift and purify humanity. Not by arguments, not by decisions of church councils, but by the lives it has strengthened and ennobled is her ministry established. It rests on the same basis as that of her brothers, the deep needs of the human soul. In a word, it is not distinctively a woman's ministry, but a human ministry of one soul to other souls.